Hey, what's up YouTube? Well, welcome back to the channel. I know I've been gone for a while, but I'm back now and I'm going to be teaching you the 5-step deadlift setup today. So this is the setup that was popularised by Starting Strength with a few of my own cues thrown in for good measure. So today we're going to be looking at the conventional deadlift. The conventional deadlift is a compound exercise, which simply means it involves multiple joints and muscle groups. So primarily the deadlift is going to be working your back, so that's going to be your traps, your rhomboids, your lats to some extent, and your spinal erectors, and all of the rest of the muscles in the posterior chain. So this is going to be your glutes and your hamstrings in particular. It's also going to be working the muscles of your grip as you have to hold onto the bar. Notable mentions here would go to the core musculature or trunk muscles, such as your obliques and your rectus abdominis and TVA, which are going to be there mostly to support the spinal erectors in keeping your back in extension or neutral range as you initiate lift. The deadlift is primarily a hip extension movement, so the majority of the movement is going to be happening around the hip joint, with a small amount of movement happening around the knee joint. This is different from the squat, where movement is happening at both the hip joint and the knee joint. If we line up the deadlift and the squat side by side, you can see that the hips are a lot lower on the squat than they are on the deadlift. This tells us that we'll be using slightly different muscle groups in the squat than we will be in the deadlift. So the deadlift, like I mentioned, is predominantly going to be using the muscles of the posterior chain, so that's the back, the glutes and the hamstrings, and it's going to be hip extension that's driving the movement. Whereas in the squat, we're going to be using more of the quads, and it's going to be extension and flexion of the knee joint where the movement is happening. Of the big three lifts, I feel the deadlift is the easiest one to teach, and the majority of people that come into the gym on day one can bend over and pick up a barbell without having to do any extensive warm-ups or mobility work. So without further ado, here is the 5-step deadlift, which is the way I like to teach deadlifts. Step number 1, foot position or feet. Step up to the bar and place the bar over the mid-foot so the bar is cutting across the middle of your foot. Your stance width will be dependent on the individual, but generally speaking, slightly narrower than shoulder width works for most people with a slightly outward toe position. The bar or barbell should be around 1 to 2 inches away from your shins. It should not be pushed right up against the shins. The bar should be over the mid-foot. Step number 2 is to take your grip. Simply bend over at the hips without bending the knees and grasp the barbell. Grip should be just outside of hip width and it should be on the knurling of the bar. You can either use a double overhand or a mixed or alternate grip for this. Pulling with an alternate or mixed grip won't cause any long-term imbalances. During step 2 is usually around the time when we would perform a Valsalva maneuver or take our breath. Step number 3 is to bring your shins to the barbell. You can do this simply by bending at the knee and bringing the shins forward to touch the bar. When you do this, be sure not to kick the bar forward by bringing the knees forward too quickly, or by grasping the bar and pulling it back towards the shins to meet the shins. The shins should be going forwards to meet the bar and resting there. When you do this step, it's important not to drop the hips too much. Try and initiate the movement from bending at the knee. Step number 4 is to set your back. There are many ways to cue people to set their backs. Simply by saying set your back may be enough for some people. Other people prefer squeeze your chest up. Some people may need to be cued to arch their back. A cue I like to use is to pull the shoulders back and down, which usually helps to pull the lats back and down and keep the bar in close to the body. You can tell if you're in the right position to pull because your arms will usually be dead straight and the inside of your elbows should be flush with the outside of your knees. By squeezing the chest up or pulling the shoulders back and down, it will create tension and it will help to pull slack out of the bar when there's a lot of weight on the bar. By doing this, you may notice the bar starts to float off the ground or move off the ground before you've even initiated the pull. This is ideal, and this is the kind of tension that we want to be building before initiating the pull. This position is not a comfortable position, nor should it feel comfortable. It's okay to feel uncomfortable for the first second as you're setting up for the deadlift. During this step, you can also use this time to take in a little bit more air if you do want to create more tension in the core. Step 5 is to initiate the pull. I like to cue people to look up or bring their gaze upward a little bit from the floor before initiating the pull. This sometimes helps with keeping the back a little bit flatter or preventing the thoracic spine from rounding. To initiate the pull, simply maintain the tension that you created in step 4 and drag the bar up your legs, keeping it in contact with your legs the entire time until the hips and the knees are fully extended at the top. Think eyes up, then drag. For the first portion of the pull, I like to cue people to push the floor away with their feet. Once the bar has passed the knees, I then tend to cue people to either get their hips forward to meet the bar or bring their shoulders back. The cue of hips forward feels very similar to that of the hip thrust. So that's push the floor away, then hips forward and shoulders back. To set the bar down, simply let it travel straight down under the force of gravity by sending your hips back and bending over. Once the bar has passed your knees, then you can let your knees come forward. If you let your knees come forward on the way down, you will either end up with the bar hitting your knees on the way down, or the bar having to travel forward to avoid your knees and you squatting the weight down. Neither of these two situations are ideal for anything, so just let the bar go straight down in the reverse movement in which you pulled it up in. It's worth noting that dropping the bar from the top is usually not very good gym etiquette. So let's move into tips and common errors or misconceptions. So the bar should remain over the midfoot throughout the lift. It begins over the midfoot and it ends over the midfoot. Your body weight or center of mass should also be over the midfoot throughout the lift. If your center of mass travels forward, it will lead to the bar drifting forward and the weight heading onto your toes. If your center of mass is held in your heels, it will lead to the bar being dragged up and back, scratching along the shins and potentially you losing your balance and falling backwards. When setting up, if the bar rolls forward or backward at any point and leaves the midfoot, you should stop the movement and start the setup again. For this reason, I don't think prescribing touch and go deadlifts to a beginner is a particularly wise idea, as the bar will be unlikely to make it back to the midfoot every time they put it down. Performing the 5-step deadlift setup for every single rep is ideal when teaching the beginner a deadlift to ingrain good movement patterns and a good setup long term. If the bar rolls mid-set to somewhere forward or backward of the midfoot, it's acceptable to roll it back to the midfoot before initiating the pull rather than pulling it from forward or backward of the midfoot. As a beginner, it may take some time to work out how to do this, so resetting up for every single rep and treating every rep as a single may be a better idea. Pulling from forward or backward of the midfoot will usually result in the rep feeling more taxing or more exhausting, and the bar speed slowing down considerably, thus compromising the efficiency of the lift. On a conventional deadlift, the hips will be lower than that of a stiff-legged deadlift, but they will be higher than that of a squat. If the hips are too low in the starting position, you will usually be able to observe them rise very quickly as the lifter initiates the lift until they reach the point that they should have been at, and then the lifter will pull from there. During the pull of each deadlift, we want to aim to keep our back within neutral range or in slight extension. It's not injurious if the upper back or thoracic spine begins to round slightly on a heavy maximal pull. However, when teaching a beginner how to deadlift, we should ingrain good movement patterns firsthand so that they can continue to try and pull the majority of their lifts with a flat back or slightly extended spine. A cue to help keep the upper back or thoracic spine nice and flat is to focus on keeping the lats pulled back and down or packing the lats. This will also help to keep the bar in close to the body if it is starting to drift forward. When bringing the shins to the bar, try not to do so aggressively that it knocks the bar forward and causes it to roll to forward of the midfoot. If you do this, you will have to reset up again with the bar back over the midfoot. There's a common misconception in the fitness industry that the weight should always be over the heels, sometimes for more glute activation. This is plainly false. The weight or center of mass should always be kept over the midfoot, and the deadlift is no exception. Having the weight in the heels will result in the bar dragging against the shins and possibly shin bruising, and the lifter losing their balance backwards. Try not to yank the bar off the floor or grip it and rip it when initiating the pull. The arms should be straight when initiating the pull, and tension should have already been created through the setting in the back or step 4. Yanking the bar will cause all of this tension to be lost, which is not ideal. Try not to lean back excessively at the top of the movement because this is unnecessary. Complete lockout for the deadlift should be when the hips and the knees are in full extension. Squeezing the glutes can be a cue to help people reach full extension at the top, but the back should not be overly arched and the lifter should not be swaying backwards. When deadlifting or performing any other pulls from the floor such as rows or RDLs, I recommend wearing flat shoes to be closer to the floor. If you don't have flat shoes that are appropriate, you could always go barefoot, or wear something like deadlift slippers. Many people prefer to wear Converse because they have a very flat, thin sole and it's easy to feel the floor through them. When teaching somebody to deadlift for the first time, I try and aim to have them use a double overhand grip and then encourage them to use that as much as possible onwards. If they can't hold a double overhand grip because their grip fails, they can go to a mixed grip or alternate grip. It's worth noting that pulling a few reps every week with an alternate grip is not going to lead to a mad imbalance of the traps or anything like that. This has been grossly overstated in the fitness community and it's really not something to be worrying about. The downside to using a mixed grip is it carries a very small risk of biceps tendon tears, as on the supinated side. However, this is very unlikely, and it's very unlikely to happen if the lifter is not yanking the bar off the floor, as we previously mentioned. Using a mixed grip does sometimes mean that the bar will drift away from the body on the supinated side a little bit more, so this is something to be aware of if using it for the first few times. Going back to the cue of pulling the lats back and down will help to prevent this. Alternatively, for maximal pulls, hook grip could be used if you are willing to persevere with the learning curve that comes with it. So there you have it, that is the 5-step deadlift setup as popularised by Starting Strength. If you like this video and you learned something about deadlifting today, feel free to give me a thumbs up because that really does help the channel out, and I'll see you in the next video.